Hey guys, my name is Shreyas and welcome to Simple Chemistry. In the previous video, we talked about Dalton's four postulates on his atomic theory. If you didn't know that, go check out that video. And we talked about how his first postulate, all all matter was made up of small indivisible particles called atoms. We talked about how that was false. Because atoms can be actually broken down into smaller particles called subatomic particles. There's actually three subatomic particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. In this video, we're going to be talking about this discovery of the electron. Okay. So, as a background, the concept of the atom was starting to take grasp in the late 1800s. So scientists start thinking about Dalton and saying, okay, this probably makes sense. The law of multiple proportions that makes sense. The atom is related to elements. They started believing Dalton and all his ideas. However, chemists began to wonder what makes atoms of different elements different from each other. So we talked about how Dalton just had this idea that an element, we know that an element is made up of atoms, right? And we talked about how an element is different from each other because the atoms which make up that element have variations, but they didn't know what those variations come from, So that's where scientists began thinking about what makes atoms different elements different from each other. So that's where this dude comes in, J.J. Thomson, and he discovers this interesting things called electrons. So what he did was he had this setup called a cathode ray tubes. So what he did was he took a metal here and he took a metal here, and he put a electric potential between them. And what happened is he saw these flow of negative particles. Okay, how did he know that these particles are negative? The way he did was because of whenever he put an electrical field, he knows that this ray of particles moved up like this, and because they were attracted to the positive end, he knew that the electrons must be negative, right? Because opposite charges attract. So if these electrons are attracted to positive, this ray of particles are attracted to positive end, they must be negative. So he knew that. Okay, since there's some sort of particles which are being shot out from these electrodes and they're passing through this chamber, and since they're negative, atoms probably are made up of these even more smaller particles called electrons. Okay, and from that he made what's called the Plum pudding model. So since atoms were known to be electrically neutral, they don't have a charge. And if atoms are made up of these electrons, which he saw in these cathode rays, there must be something to bounce out the negative particles, or the electrons. So they must have positively charged stuff to bounce the charge. So what he did was he created this plum pudding model, meaning that he said the atom looked something like this. Now, if you don't know what plum pudding is, it's kind of like I think it's like an English dessert where you have raisins and then you have the bread around it. I didn't know about it until I looked it up, but anyways, he named it after that. So he basically said how these electrons are kind of like the raisins, and they're dispersed throughout an atom, and then the blue area is just like this positive stuff, and they bounce each other out and in order to create the atom. Okay, and for a while this was the theory of the atom, and this helped prove this first conjecture, how different atoms of elements were different from each other. He thought that, okay, the reason why elements are different from each other are because their atoms have different numbers of electrons. And for a while, scientists believed this, and this plum pudding model is completely wrong. However, the discovery of the electron was very, very critical part in the idea of the atom, and it helped get to the idea of the atom which we have today. So thank J.J. Thomson, and that's it. That's all you have to know for electrons. The discovery of the electron is as simple as that.